Hi, my name is Brian Maestri, and I'm an economist with Mississippi Valley Division, and I'm going to be presenting on an assessment of flood risk using the HEC-FDA model for coastal evaluations. And in particular, a case study is for Southwest coastal Louisiana, which was a study that was completed back in 2015, but became an important study because it recommended a comprehensive non-structural solutions to reduce flood risk. Overview of the presentation, first the background, and then look at the inputs and the calculation of uncertainty using the HEC-FDA model. We want to go through a Monte Carlo simulation example, and finally to look at a risk assessment of the Southwest coastal non-structural alternatives. So to get started on the background and alternatives, let's get started with the study purpose. The study purpose was both for national economic development purposes and for national ecosystem restoration, as you can read in the purpose. And it's for a 3-parish area. We do not have counties. We have parishes. They're Cameron, which is on the border of Texas and Louisiana, then Calcasieu and Vermilion Parish. Here you can see on the slide to the upper left is your without project with a home being flooded, and then the solution on the right, the NED solution was non-structural measure elevation. And on the bottom left, you see that the disappearing marsh for this area right near the Gulf of Mexico. And then on the right is the having that marsh come back, it would reforestation and marsh creation. So those are the solutions of NER. The location of this study area, again, to remind you, is coastal Louisiana, and it's near the Texas-Louisiana border. I had presented on Morganza to the Gulf, which is about 200 miles to the east. You can see the city of Houma in a previous presentation for this course. And that study was completed in around 2013. And then you can see where New Orleans is, which is where I am right now speaking from. And that's on southeast Louisiana. And we're about 260 miles east of Southwest Coastal. Here's a view of the study area that shows just how vulnerable this area is to flooding. As you can see, there's the Gulf of Mexico is south, and then there's this marshy areas that with the Calcasieu Navigation Channel and the Mermentor River running through it, and the Vermilion River, and so the freshwater bayous. So there's these bayous running into it, which allows for surge to get into the area. And then when during tropical events, you have the heavy rainfall and the winds. And you can see the largest area, by the way, is Lake Charles, which is has about 80,000 people. This area has, at least in 2010, about 258,000, the 2010 census, and about 80,000 in Lake Charles. But then you had some surrounding communities that had oil and gas type jobs, and you had over 100,000. So over 40% of your population is in this north west corridor of the study area. And then the second largest community is Abbeville in Vermilion Parish, and has about 12,000. The rest of these communities have 3,000 or 4,000 people or less. So it's a very spread out, small in terms of population. The population is very dispersed. So we're in Cajun country, and a little bit about the culture of this area. Vermilion calls itself the most Cajun place in the world. Calcasieu it comes from a Native American word that means crying eagle, and the French spelled it Calcasieu, and you'll see a lot of shops spelled in stores and streets named like that in the French way when they settled here. And then the Cameron Parish, which is right on the Texas-Louisiana border, was part of no man's land, and as part of the Louisiana Purchase, and there was disputes about the boundary between the U.S. and Spain, and so you had pirates and those type of figures, and you had Jean Lafitte, who came in from Galveston in that area and then lived here for a while. So it's a pretty historic area. Uh, to continue on with the Cajun culture, the descendants in this area come from, as you can see up at the top left, descendants from French Canadians who were in Canada, and they came and they relocated from Nova Scotia to Louisiana. So you have French that makes up not only the Cajun and also the Creole, which is in the southeast portion of the state, which is where I am. And again, the Creole are more the European descents. They were born in Europe, in French, in Spain, and then you had the African nation and the peoples that came from there into both of these areas, and along with the Native Americans. So you really have a melting pot here. But you do have some distinctions between the Cajun and the Creole. The food, driving around the study area and developing the inventory, has great restaurants. Just to let you know that it's some of the spiciest food you ever take is Cajun food. Creole is relatively spicy, but Cajun is even spicier. And it's known, it's some of the differences, it's known for more wild game. For example, at the bottom left, you can see this is alligator sauce piquant with some nice rice. And then you got crawfish, and you see we have crawfish boils here in New Orleans and across the state. You get some newspaper, put it on a table, you boil the crawfish with all these spices, and you get those spices out when you eat, suck the head of it. And then the corn and the potatoes are very spicy. Your lips will be burning, but it's very good. And in New Orleans, then you see more traditional seafood, which is the shrimp Creole dish. I don't know if all of that made you hungry. I don't know if it's your lunch or dinner for you. And I just wanted to, with the culture, close with Justin Wilson. He's just a famous Cajun chef and humorist, and he always had a cooking show on how to cook Cajun, and he always would cook up a dish and say how good it is. He says, I tell you it's good, I guarantee. So he's famous for that. He's not with us anymore, but he is long remembered in Cajun land. Some Cajun terms that you might hear when you're driving through this area is laissez le bon temps rouler, let the good times roll, and c'est la vie, that's life. And my sweet Cher, everybody calls her a Cher, and bourrée is a Cajun card game that they have, and fey dodo, you'll see a lot of those in the clubs in the areas. It's a Cajun dance party where the adults or the parents were downstairs dancing with the fiddles, and upstairs the children were sleeping to the music. So that's a fey dodo. So that's the culture of the area. And let's get to the economics. The study area, in terms of the inventoried area, a lot of this area is in the 100-year floodplain. About 160,000 residents were in the inventoried area using the 2010 census. Per capita income, you can see that is around $40,000. The employment drivers, oil and gas, offshore fisheries, agriculture, rice is very prevalent in this part, along with aquaculture, the crawfish farms. And of course, we talked about the Cajun food and culture. In the structure inventory here, actually 52,000 structures were inventoried, 47,000 residential, and 5,000 non-residential structures. This area has quite a history of flooding. Hurricane Rita, which made landfall near the Louisiana-Texas border, affected over 50,000 homes in this area back in 2005. Rita was only 2 weeks after Hurricane Katrina really devastated New Orleans and the southeastern portion of Louisiana. And to any storm that goes south of this area that's relatively close will cause problems. Hurricane Ike did in 2008 as it entered and really devastated Galveston, but caused damage to over 10,000 homes in this area just going south here. And there's been no year like this past year. 2020 was really tough on this area. 2 large hurricanes went right through it. Hurricane Laura, which was a Category 4, which means it had sustained winds for over a minute of 150 miles an hour, went in around the city of Cameron. And then 6 weeks later was Hurricane Delta, which was a Category 2 storm with 105 miles an hour. And the landfall was only within 10, 20 miles away from where Laura hit. So, here you got recoveries sort of just beginning. We still had a lot of people in New Orleans, actually, but people with the blue roofs trying to get back, and then 6 weeks later, here comes another storm event. There was $16 billion of damages from Hurricane Laura, and then Delta added about approximately another $4 billion. So it's sort of like, what is there to get damaged after something's already been damaged, right? And this is just another view, and it shows you the exact dates, showing you that about 6 weeks apart in the devastation to this area and exactly where they went in. And Holly Beach is a little community right along the coast, and I wanted to show you about that because for coastal evaluations, rebuilding is looked at a lot. And I've started some research on that, but look at this community of about 2,000 or 3,000 people. You can see the homes right before Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And then in the end of September, look at the community with the sand and that was thrown into this community. And then you look at 2008, just 3 years later, you can see it's coming back. The structures are being rebuilt, and here they get hit again. And then you look at what happened in 2020. Well, here's Holly Beach. You can see the structures are back. People in Louisiana do not like to leave. They live by the water, and that's where they want to stay. And so here comes Laura and Delta, and this is the way the area looks in 2020. So, you know, it's interesting to even study that how many storm events before you make the decision to retreat, or do you return? In terms of looking at solutions to these problems, well, there's the no action, which is an alternative. But we really started out this study, and it kind of was a legacy study. It started back in 2010, and we picked it back up in 2014, 2015, and levees were looked at along these communities. Actually, remember we talked about Lake Charles, which is where most of the population is in this study area. As we said, about 40%, and there's some industry up in there. So levees were looked up in there, and these other smaller communities. We talked about Abbeville with 12,000 people, 13,000. A levee was looked at there, in Delcrum and Erath. But it's so spread out, this area, that it was very difficult to economically justify any type of structural approach, levees. Now, we didn't know that, but that's what we found. Actually, a levee was looked at along the whole length of the study area near the Gulf. And yes, it did reduce damages, but it was so expensive it couldn't be economically justified, especially not having the amount of property like you have in New Orleans, and like you don't have that here. So what we ended up looking at is non-structural plans, and we said, wow, they're outperforming the structural plans. And so we fell upon that, and so that's what we'll talk about later in the presentation, non-structural solutions as a solution to flood risks. So that's all I have for the introduction. I did want to add one slide to the introduction, and that's the National Ecosystem Restoration Features. As you can see on this slide, it shows the Cheniere reforestation and the marsh restoration. These NER features were looked at along with the NED solutions. Those were also implemented and part of the recommendation, but they are not part of this presentation. But I did want you to see how these NER features also can be used to reduce flood risk.